bottom line is always madness.
Bottom line is always madness. I think my biggest takeaway from a forward-looking standpoint, and if you look at his PFF grade and his stats, they do finally show up well because of a bomb to Devonta Smith. But Jalen Hurts struggled against the blitz last night. And Sam Schwartzstein, who is the analytics expert for Amazon Prime, talked about it before the game even started. He was 24th in success rate last year. That is Hurts against the blitz. And you saw that. He struggled against that for a lot of the night. He was holding onto the ball for 5-8 seconds and not finding anything downfield. Obviously, no one is going to blitz at the rate that Brian Flores does. Maybe Wink Martindale with the Giants will do it twice against Philadelphia. But I think there's to a degree, a blueprint of what to do. Obviously, you need a better secondary than Minnesota's, or you're going to get the Devonta Smith walk-in touchdown and some other downfield throws. But it gave Hurts fits like a lot of the night.
Yeah, so I'm kind of conflicted coming out of that game, right? Because you're left with the feeling that Brian Flores actually did a really good job with that defense, and yet in several ways it was catastrophic. Like, they couldn't stop the run. They gave up multiple deep bombs, but they did hold Philadelphia to some real problems in the passing game, and outside of those bombs did a really good job. And, you talk about the blitzing. They actually blitzed more than they didn't. They were calling a blitz more than 50% of the time on defense. I wonder, is that type of scheme, does that just sort of get better press than if you were a little bit more conservative and you still got gashed for whatever it was, 430 net yards? Like, do you kind of give the guy style points for at least being aggressive and winning on some snaps? It's only when you take it in the totality that you're like, actually, this wasn't a good defensive performance at all. They gave up, a ton of yards and quite a lot of points in the end.
I think you do, because look, this is one of the least talented defenses in the NFL. They frankly got worse than last year, and they give up 30 points or more. I want to say the last 7 games of the season last year. And then you trade Zadarius Smith, who had like 80 pressures. You lose Dalvin Tomlinson, who's also a great player, look good. Both of those guys look good in Cleveland in week 1. So for me, yes, because I think it did have an impact early. I mean, Hurts' throw to Devonta Smith with a hand in his face was awesome. He was able to overcome it on certain snaps. Yeah. But if they sat back and soft zone like Ed Donatel last year, the Eagles would have had 5,000 yards, not 450. So for me, it does still matter. And the rushing yards thing, the Eagles offensive line created 115 yards before contact last night. Would have been a top 10 mark in the NFL for all of last season. Obviously is number 1 so far in 2023. That is kind of what they do. I mean, they're an exceptional offensive line. Jeff Stoutland there in Philadelphia is as good as it gets in the run game, and coaching those guys. Excuse me. But, yeah, I mean, at least Flores tried. At least he tried to do something, and it did work at times.
Yeah, and it worked specifically with Jalen Hurts a lot. Like, there's been conversations, if you listen to some of the tape people, the X's and O's guys, Joe Banner, the former Philadelphia Eagles executive, talked about this before. The teams that have been able to do a good job against this offense for Philadelphia are teams that have stacked the line of scrimmage with those kind of 5- and 6-man defensive front looks. And the Vikings did that a lot. A lot of the plays they dropped out of it in, like they didn't send all those 5 or 6 guys. They dropped them off the line of scrimmage, but they showed that look pre-snap. And it did a very good job of bottling up Jalen Hurts from a rushing point of view, relative. Now, it didn't do anything to stop DeAndre Swift and Boston Scott and like the running backs. They couldn't stop the actual designed run game, but they were able to kind of limit exactly how Philadelphia was running the ball. But I guess the overall question becomes like, is this type of scheme, like, was this a good performance from Brian Flores by like limiting the damage that was going to be done to a bad personnel group? Or is this a slightly suicidal type of game plan because, at some point you're going to hang a Caleb Evans out one-on-one in man coverage, and that's like an automatic touchdown. Like, I'm kind of on the fence as to whether that's good or bad to be hyper-aggressive in these situations knowing you have crappy personnel, because you might catch the good end of variance and like a bunch of good plays get stacked in your direction. That's all you need. Versus like maybe you should recognize that your personnel is garbage and actually try and protect them more than he was going to.
I think you touched on it right there, is that he started with a lot of blitzing, and then there was a lot of drop 8, right? And just rush 3 and sit back in coverage. And there was like a sack after 8.5 seconds. Danielle Hunter had one of his sacks on Jalen Hurts, and maybe some sim pressures or having Ivan Pace, mugging the A gap, because he is already a great, pass rusher as an inside linebacker, like doing those things, even if you don't bring them because you brought them earlier in the game. I know we're talking about a team that gave up 34 points, but the Vikings also fumbled the ball 4 times, gave the Eagles offense some advantageous field position and looks. And again, like I said, I mean, the personnel is just not good. So I don't know. For me, I know it sounds silly. I thought it was a good game plan and a good idea, a good approach from Brian Flores. It's just like you said, sometimes you are going to hang a guy out to dry in a one-on-one with A.J. Brown or Devonta Smith, and no one's winning that, even the great corners in the NFL, much less guys that are, learning the NFL game as of right now.
And they did absolutely, fool the Eagles and Jalen Hurts on a couple of occasions. Like the interception was a great example of that, right? They showed a much more aggressive formation, and then they dropped everybody out. They were playing with that 3 safety look a lot over the course of the game. That was one of those plays. They also, the guy stacked at the line of scrimmage dropped all the way back and ended up being the guy to pick it off. But any one of 2 different Viking safeties had a beat on that pass. It was, I think Jalen Hurts was completely fooled. So, yeah, I think I lean in your direction that, better to go down swinging than just with a million paper cuts knowing that you're overmatched anyway. You might as well try and catch the good plays. The other part of this game, though, the fumbles was huge. And honestly, that cost Minnesota this game. They could and maybe should have won this if they just didn't keep pitching the ball back to the Eagles. It was amazing. Big punt return that ends up should have been setting them up with a short field. The ball comes out on the tackle and ends up turning it back. Justin Jefferson fumbling the ball over the goal line, everybody's favorite rule. Touchback instead of touchdown. Like, that's a monstrous swing. They could not stop putting the ball on the ground. And I felt for the offense because they were wildly overmatched on the offensive line. It got worse because Christian Darrisaw was never really ready to go, and then his backup, Oli Udoh, goes down, and now David Quessenberry's out there at left tackle, like third-string left tackle, in addition to either backups on the interior or backup level people on the interior. And yet Kirk Cousins is out here absolutely balling.
Pretty funny, like how often he has great games when they lose, and you're going to hear Kirk Cousins in prime time. Kirk was pretty awesome last night.
Really
let's be honest. Like, he had a very good game. Obviously, the touchback, I do think that throw was awful to Justin Jefferson. I'm not going to blame Kirk for Justin Jefferson fumbling the ball and having a touchback, but he was so late on that throw, and it was so behind Jefferson that he should have had a walk-in touchdown. But to Kirk's credit, he actually said that in his post-game press conference. He blamed himself and was harsh on himself for that throw. So, he's aware of it as well. But yeah, he was great in the second half. He was 7 of 11 for 145 yards on throws, 10 plus yards downfield with 2 touchdowns and the KJ Osborne big drop. Yeah, you mentioned, was it Brandon Powell, the punt returner? Yeah. He was at midfield. I mean, that was a great return until he fumbled. So you can blame a lot of people for last night's loss. I don't think Kirk is too high on that list.
I mean, most of the time, sometimes box score numbers just don't tell the story at all. Sometimes they actually do get you in the ballpark. This one was just fascinating. When you consider the offensive line that we just talked about, the fact that they had 4 turnovers, only one of which was, a Cousins thing, and that was a strip sack that he couldn't really do anything about, and the fact that they had 28 rushing yards in the game, right? For Kirk Cousins to go 31 of 44 for 364 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, which is a passer rating of 125.6, is ridiculous. Like, he has no business having that kind of game. It was an 83.1 PFF grade. When he was kept clean, it was 89.9. Like, that was a phenomenal performance from him in a situation that just should not have been a game that good by Kirk Cousins.